Good morning all. The Barbados Museum Historical Society is pleased to launch a local iteration of the internationally travelling exhibition from Aston University in the UK, Behind the Wire, Civilian Internment in the British Empire 1914 to 1919. The exhibition explores German and Austrian civilian internment in the British Empire from 1914 to 1919, the duration of World War I. In addition to showcasing existing exhibition material, the Barbados Museum has researched and created 4 panels focusing on internment in Barbados during World War I. We would like to thank Professor Manns and Aston University for their generosity in sharing this exhibition with us, as well as collaborators in the staff of the Barbados Museum, Miguel Pena for developing research and content, and Michelle Coxon co-developing the youth workshop with our education officer, Kay Hall. As part of the launch of the exhibition, the Barbados Museum is hosting a virtual webinar panel discussion on internment and Barbados in World War I today at 3 p.m. Barbados time on Zoom, and also live streamed to the Barbados Museum's Facebook page. Speakers include Dr. Glenford Ho, Professor Stephen Manns, and Jeff Ward, and the discussion will be moderated by Colonel Glyn Branham, former Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defence Force. Many thanks to them for sharing their expertise and time with us in the launch of the exhibition. Behind the Wire can be found in the Upper Courtyard and Prison Cell of the Barbados Museum and runs until November 28, 2021. And at this time, I would like to hand over to our Deputy Director, Mr. Kevin Farmer, for opening remarks from the Barbados Museum.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us this morning for what is a very important exhibition that explores part of the history of World War I that involves Barbados that so few of us know. Those of us who are a certain age will remember around this time as we approach Remembrance Day, having to read and or recite a particular poem, Dulce est decorum est part morte, how good and sweet it is to die for the fatherland. And that which was written about trench warfare in World War II spoke to the horrors of war, but it never dealt with what happened to the civilians and the civilian populations. And what this exhibition looks at is a small bit of the civilian population who were caught up in being identified as enemies of the state simply because of their nationality and the ways in which they were treated, whether they lived in English space, being deemed to be foreign nationals, or that they were caught on the sea in English boats and then transferred to English soil and interred. So I think it's extremely important, and I thank Professor Manns for sharing with us his research, but also Miguel Pena for adding what is the Barbadian flavor to holistically understand how prisoners of war were dealt with through the empire, and then specifically how they were dealt with in Barbados. So I look forward to seeing you come to the exhibition, take part in our panel discussion, and for us to have that reflection on how war affects all of us. And thank you so much for coming this morning, and enjoy.
Thanks, Kevin. At this time, I would like to invite Professor Stephen Manns to share some opening remarks as well.
Thank you for your kind words, and thanks for coming to this opening event for the exhibition. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And as Kevin just said, this exhibition tries to focus on a different story around the First World War. We are well familiar with soldiers fighting on the front. We are well familiar with all kinds of other stories, but very little has been written about, and very little is known about civilians. How did civilians actually experience the First World War? Now, this exhibition is coming out of deeper research into this topic, and this is a book which just came out last year. It's entitled Enemies in the Empire, Civilian Internment in the British Empire During the First World War. And the cover of the book is from the internment camp in Kingston, Jamaica. So you can see the barbed wire here and the palm trees in the background. So this is a telling reminder of the fact that the Caribbean was quite affected by the issue of internment as well. And the way the exhibition is conceived is that it fits in nicely with local issues around the world. The exhibition has been shown in locations in Britain, in Ireland, in Canada, in the United States, in South Africa, and now it's being shown in Barbados. And each of these locations have made an effort to add something local to the exhibition. So what you're holding in your hands, this is the exhibition catalog with the global panels that depicts the global situation. And what colleagues in the museum have done here in Barbados is add some other panels that just describe the situation in Barbados, in the Caribbean, in order to contextualize the Barbadian experience into or within the global context. It's wonderfully done, and thank you very much for colleagues from the museum. It's really well done. If you have time later, please do browse we'll do the tour anyway of the exhibition, and we can explain this a little bit. I was also very pleased and very delighted to do a workshop with theatre students from the Barbados Community College, sorry, I knew it was BCC, yesterday, and it was a pure delight to work with theatre students. I gave them a tour, explained the situation a little bit, not just about the issue of internment, but also around the First World War, and it shows that through this issue, students and visitors learn other issues around the First World War as well. And after the tour, they did a very creative piece, a theatre piece, which they wrote and performed themselves, drawing on a lot of information from the exhibition. So that worked well and shows that the exhibition and the issue of civilian internment is adaptable. It can be shown in all kinds of locations. And yet again, a huge thanks to colleagues from the museum to host this exhibition, and I'm looking forward to giving a tour now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mans, and thank you again to everyone who joined us this morning. We'd now like to invite you to join us on a tour of the exhibition in the Upper Courtyard.
The significant event for us this morning on what is actual Remembrance Day is an exhibition that explores a kind of a hidden part of the history of World War I, and that is looking at internment camps throughout the British Empire that would have interred German and Austrian civilians as part of the British effort to control what they deemed to be foreign enemies of the state. So Professor Mans, Stephen Mans, from Ashton University, reached out to the museum over a year ago based on part of his PhD research to explore this hidden part where we can argue that there was almost an attempt to erase that particular discussion around civilian internments in Commonwealth. The exhibition here looks at it in its global context, and through our local research, we've added what is the Barbadian element to that. And for those who are watching, Glengarry Prison was in fact the POW camp utilized in Barbados during the First World War. So we're really exploring those themes and that history this morning. And we're hoping that Barbadians will take the time out to come to the exhibition. It's only up to the 28th of November. There will be streamed panel discussion this afternoon with Professor Mans and Professor Howe and Jeff Ward, moderated by the former Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defence Force, Colonel Glenn Branham. Hopefully people can go onto our Facebook page to view that, because it's at 3 o'clock. So by the time they see this, it would have been old news. Things like this allow us to take a deeper dive into our history, to begin to recover those narrative voices that aren't always being discussed. And in keeping with what is ongoing in the wider research into social justice issues really dealing with the decolonization of history. But I'll let Professor Mann speak about that because I think that is extremely important. And this exhibition is part of that particular type of examination of that historical narrative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this exhibition has come out of a book which I've published last year. The book is entitled Enemies in the Empire, Civilian Internment in the British Empire, 1914 to 1919. The exhibition takes the most interesting elements of that book and uses a lot of images, photographs I've found in archives around the world and shows these on 18 global panels that explain the global history of civilian internment in the First World War in the British Empire. And then another four panels that explain internment in Barbados and the West Indies. So the concept behind the exhibition is that it shows a global narrative that can be adapted to various locations worldwide. The exhibition has been shown in various museums and libraries in Britain, in Ireland, in South Africa, in the United States, and Canada. And each of these locations have made a particular exhibit about the local story. In Canada, for example, a part of a barbed wire was exhibited that went round the camp. And here in Barbados, colleagues in the museum have taken a very imaginative approach to the local story by presenting these panels in an actual prison cell. The museum is a former prison, as you might know. It's not the prison where these internees were interned during the First World War, but it's still a prison. So the sense of place really comes out very strongly with the local panels that show. Firstly, the first panel is about the West Indies engagement in the First World War with the British West Indies Regiment being sent to Europe, etc. So it really gives the context. The second panel shows how internees were treated in Glengarry prison, and the third panel gives a general story about enemy aliens in Barbados. One of the interesting stories I found when I talked to colleagues here, historians, museum staff, etc., is the story of George Stade. I understand that he was a local rum producer. He actually founded what is today the West Indies rum distillery, which was called Stade's Distillery, and his story is also on one of the panels, on one of the local panels. He actually had returned to Germany before the First World War, but when he lived in Germany through the First World War, he was accused of being a British spy because he had lived in a British territory for such a long time. So you get the sense, we've got the global panels here and then the local story in an actual prison cell in this lovely museum.